The 2024 election is already underway in a number of key battleground states and other states offering early voting around the country. So these returns can give us an early glimpse as to how the November election could end up turning out. Now, we're going to look at two states in this video in particular, Virginia and Pennsylvania. Virginia has the amount of total early votes returned, so we can kind of keep track of that, and this has been mapped out across the state by congressional district. And Pennsylvania has the amount of mail-in ballots requested. So these aren't actual tangible results in Pennsylvania. These aren't ballot returns. They're just registered voters asking for a mail-in ballot that'll probably be sent to them in the coming days. So ultimately, we're going to try to analyze these results to see which candidate is favored and which party is developing an advantage based on some of these early vote returns. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So when it comes to the Virginia early vote, something stands out right away. When we take a look at the overall turnout by congressional district, the highest turnout regions in Virginia are Republican areas. The 1st congressional district, for example, which went to the Republicans by 13 points in 2022, has the highest turnout when it comes to early vote returns. So far, they've had 30,000 early vote ballots returned. The second highest is the 5th congressional district, again, another Republican-leaning district. We have the 6th congressional district and the 9th congressional district. All of these congressional districts are very Republican-leaning, and all of them in 2022 voted for Republicans for Congress by double digits, and Donald Trump won all of these districts back in 2020. So if this is any indicator, early on, it's that Republicans have much more of an early vote operation, at least in Virginia, than they did back in 2020. Now, I think a lot of this has to do with Glenn Youngkin's initiative to get out the vote early. This was something he did back in 2021, and it helped him obviously secure his victory. But it was also a project he embarked on in 2022 and 2023. And while Republicans didn't necessarily outright win those elections in Virginia, the margins overall were much closer. And especially in 2023, Republicans won every House of Delegates and state Senate district that Joe Biden won by under 10 points. So that's a pretty impressive overperformance, even though the party ended up falling short of retaining the chambers at the end of the day. So there has been tangible improvements with this early vote outreach from Glenn Youngkin. So I think that has to do a lot with why the Republican parts of Virginia have an increase in early ballot returns as opposed to Democratic areas. Now, one of the lowest, in fact, the lowest congressional district on this list is Congressional District 3. This is a majority-minority congressional district, and this could give us a glimpse as to how black enthusiasm is expected to be in this election, because right now it seems to be very low, only around 12,000 early votes returned. And, obviously for reference, all of these congressional districts are roughly the same size in population. So that's less than half of what we saw in the 1st congressional district. So right off the bat, you obviously have a massive turnout differential between these Republican areas and these majority-minority districts. Now, the 2nd and 3rd lowest congressional districts, funny enough, on this list are in Fairfax County. Now, this is the most Democratic part of the state. If we take a look at Fairfax in 2020, Joe Biden got 70% of the vote here to Donald Trump's just 28%. So this is a super blue county, super suburban county, and it surrounds Arlington and Alexandria, super blue cities outside of Washington, D.C. And these supposedly have the lowest turnout in the state outside of the 3rd congressional district. So that's certainly good news for the Trump campaign. That means that their efforts to invest more in early voting have been effective, at least here in Virginia so far. Again, this is really the best state in terms of looking ahead as to how the candidates are going to perform in November. Now, obviously, Virginia is not a swing state this election. I fully expect Kamala Harris to win the state by over 6 to 8 points. But if Donald Trump is able to keep Kamala Harris to that margin, I think that's a pretty good sign, because it means that the Republicans have gained ground in the state since 2020. It shows that Glenn Youngkin's turnout operation is effective in the state, particularly in areas of the state that are super Republican and that normally have very low turnouts. The 9th congressional district, for example, has the lowest turnout in the state, and so far it is ranking 4th on this list in terms of ballots returned in the early vote. And some of these counties have had 200% plus swings from 2020 in terms of early vote activity. I think Buchanan County was on that list. Again, that's a super Republican county in Western Virginia. So that just goes to show you right off the bat that there is a lot of Republican enthusiasm powered by this early vote operation. Now, it is very early, obviously, in the season. It's only the end of September, so this could change. You could see more enthusiasm in Hampton Roads, these black majority areas as we get into October, which obviously is very good news for Kamala Harris. And Fairfax as well. But so far, it seems if this, and this has been a steady result over the past week. I've been watching the early vote returns come in. The 1st congressional district has always been in the lead. And this area is a good Republican-leaning indicator as to how the election is going to turn out, because it makes up parts of Chesterfield County outside of Richmond. That's been a leftward trending suburban county. You have the eastern shore of Virginia. This is more highly educated Republican parts of the state. So it's a pretty good cross-section, I think, as to how Republicans are doing overall in more of these suburban areas. The 7th congressional district is also on this list. Now, the 7th congressional district ranks 5th in turnout on this list, and it is a competitive district. Joe Biden won this district by 6 to 7 points back in 2020, and Abigail Spanberger won this district by, I believe, 4 points, 4 to 6 points, I think, back in 2022. So this is ground zero for purple congressional districts in the state. You have the 2nd congressional district with Jen Kiggans as the incumbent. I think she's favored there. We'll talk more about House districts and, House predictions as we get into October. But that's a district that she won by 4 points back in 2022. I expect her to win by a little bit more in 2024. The turnout there is kind of average for the state, but the 7th congressional district has a very competitive congressional race with Abigail Spanberger stepping aside to run for governor in 2025. Derek Anderson versus Eugene Vidman. We're probably going to make a separate video on this race, but it ranks on the higher side when it comes to early vote turnout. No surprise, but this district is going to be a really good indicator as to how the Republicans are performing in ex-urban counties, because this makes up counties like Stafford, for example. I mean, we could just take a look at the 2022 results. It makes up important counties like Stafford. This is an ex-urban county outside of Nova. Same with Spotsylvania. So these could be good indicators as to how well Donald Trump is doing in exurbs across the country. You also have more rural counties, Culpeper, Madison, and Yesli Vega was able to improve over Donald Trump's margins here in 2020. But the reason she lost this district overall is because she barely won Stafford County and she only won Spotsylvania County by 8. And of course, you had higher turnout in Prince William County, this section of the district, this part of the county that is super Democratic. So the congressional district is exactly the same as the one we're seeing here. And so far, turnout is on the higher side. So that's Virginia in a nutshell. We're obviously going to probably be visiting these results maybe once a week or so just to kind of analyze where they're at. But so far, this is better news for Republicans than the polls have been indicating. Although if you look at any battleground polling, it's all within the margin of error. So this election result is going to be frustratingly close as it's shaping up to be. Now, Pennsylvania is the other state on this list. Now, the main difference between Pennsylvania and Virginia is that Pennsylvania is tracking so far the number of early vote applications. So these aren't actually results, whereas Virginia is actually tracking early vote returns. These are mail-ins and early votes that have actually been processed. So that's really the big difference. That's why the number in Virginia is much lower than what we're going to see in Pennsylvania, which is 1.4 million. Now, this map right here by county is very reminiscent of what we saw when it came to the early election night returns. You know, it's 7, 8 o'clock, whatever, when the polls just closed, because that was all the early mail-in votes being counted in 2020 and 2022. So you have super dark blue in not even just urban counties, but also even red-leaning counties and bellwether counties, places like Erie. Highest turnout we have so far is Philadelphia. Allegheny, I think, is probably number one on this list in terms of turnout. You've got 126,000 applications from Democrats, just 34,000 from Republicans. Now, for reference, Joe Biden won Allegheny County by 20 points. He got 430,000 votes in the county to Donald Trump's 282,000. So far, Democrats by far and away are the leaders in the early vote there. Of course, Philadelphia is next, 123,000 applications from Democrats, just 10,000 or 11,000 from Republicans. Montgomery County, you've got 28,000 from Republicans, 83,000 from Democrats. And also, unsurprisingly, these are basically squared up with how these counties are population-wise. Philadelphia is probably the most populous, followed by Allegheny, Montgomery, Bucks, so on and so forth. Bucks, Chester, and Delaware. This is really the Philadelphia collar counties right here. This area is going to be super important on election night because these are highly educated, high turnout suburban voters. And while these counties have always voted Democrat since 1992 for the most part, barring Chester County, their margin of victory for Democrats really determines whether or not Republicans can win the state as a whole. So far, the Chester County results, 20,000 requests from Republicans, 46,000 from Democrats. Bucks County, 57,000 for Democrats, 28,000 for Republicans. So these are counties we're going to watch very closely over the next couple weeks because this is really going to determine the results here, whether or not Kamala Harris or Donald Trump wins the state of Pennsylvania, because Donald Trump could run it up in the rural parts of the state. In a lot of cases, some have speculated that he's sort of maxed out in rural Pennsylvania. He needs to make inroads either in the Philadelphia collar counties or in places like Scranton, in bluer counties that are more working class, places like Lehigh County, Northampton, areas like Erie. These are areas where Donald Trump needs to improve to sort of offset the inevitable gains you're probably going to see Harris get in the Philadelphia collar counties, because these counties have only been getting more Democratic as the cycles have gone on. We went from 2016, where Hillary Clinton only won Chester County by 9, to Joe Biden winning it by 17. So huge shifts away from the GOP in the Philly collar counties, and really only gains for Republicans in the central and western portion of the state. So these are areas we're going to be watching critically on election night, and this is really going to determine whether or not Donald Trump wins the state. Now, Democrats tend to lock down Pennsylvania in elections after 2020, mainly because of their early vote firewall. In 2020, Joe Biden got 78.4% of the mail-in vote to Donald Trump's just 20%. Now, again, these are requests. Republicans at 26% of the early vote to Democrats 62%. Again, this is early vote requests registered by party. Now, an important caveat to consider again is the fact that you're going to have more Democrats voting on election day because you don't have the pandemic, which last time sort of scared a lot of Democrats and kept them in their houses and led them to vote by mail. So this time around, that's not a factor, and we've seen that more Democrats are voting on election day, less so by mail. So it's not so much that Republicans are increasing their operation in mail-in voting, at least in Pennsylvania. It's probably just that Democrats are just lower because less Democrats are turning out. But so far, this is really the early picture we have so far. Again, Democrats by far and away leading in the early vote requests in Pennsylvania. Really shouldn't be a surprise. Republicans at just 26%. Republicans really need to continue to hammer on with their election early voting strategy, because they can't win Pennsylvania without it. And what past elections have proven over the last few cycles is that the Democratic firewall is incredibly strong. And with Democrats having a margin of victory of over 500,000 in the early vote, Republicans just don't seem to be able to make it up on election day. So that's going to be critical for Republicans in the coming weeks. So anyway, that's it for today's video. This was sort of just an early glimpse as to how the early vote is turning out. Again, we have well over a month before election day. We're obviously going to see more results flood in, and we'll certainly be able to analyze those here on the channel. So if you don't want to miss that, be sure to subscribe down below, like this video, and again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.